Hello and welcome to the channel where every story whispers a truth you never saw coming. Before I even begin, I need you to do something for me. If this story grips your heart, if you feel the chill of the silence I'm about to describe, promise me you'll hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and most importantly, subscribe. Because trust me, this is a tale you won't want to miss. My name is Eleanor Vance. I'm not a woman of great wealth, but I am a woman of great resolve. I'm 65 years old, a widow, and I live in a quiet, historic Victorian home nestled deep in the coastal heart of Charleston, South Carolina. The kind of place with wrought iron gates, Spanish moss hanging from the live oaks, and a front porch that tells 1,000 stories. For years, my life was a picture of serene stability. I raised my son Wesley alone after my dear husband Thomas passed away far too young. I poured every drop of my love, every spare penny I earned from my small bookkeeping business into that boy. He was my purpose. But sometimes when you're pouring yourself out for someone, you don't notice the cracks forming until the whole vessel shatters. It was Tuesday morning. The air in the house was thick with unspoken tension, heavier than the coastal humidity. Wesley came lumbering down the stairs, reeking faintly of stale whiskey and self-pity. He walked into my dining room where I sat at the head of the antique mahogany table, carefully smoothing out the linen runner. He hadn't noticed the tight way I was holding my jaw or the slight tremor in my fingers as I adjusted the cutlery. He certainly hadn't noticed the deep, sickening purple beginning to bloom beneath my left eye. He was too consumed by his own arrogance, his own self-importance, which lately had become a thin mask for his failure. He reached for a blueberry scone from the basket I'd baked, my specialty, took a large, greedy bite and began to speak, his voice loud and dismissive. "So, Mom," he chewed, crumbs dusting the pristine linen, "about last night. I think it's time we discuss some boundaries. You need to start respecting that I'm a man and this is my—" The words were instantly strangled in his throat. The buttery scone, half-chewed, dropped from his hand and landed with a soft, pathetic splat on the polished hardwood floor. His gaze had shifted from my bruised face, which he'd clearly glossed over, to the figure seated calmly in the Queen Anne chair directly to my right. His face, which had been flushed with last night's residual alcohol, drained to a terrible, sickly white. His eyes went wide, reflecting a terror I hadn't seen since he was 5 years old and lost in a crowd. He knew. In that single, frozen moment, he understood that my silence from the hours before hadn't been shock or weakness or the motherly acceptance he had banked on. It had been a premeditated declaration of war. It was a verdict. But for you to truly comprehend the gravity of this breakfast, this cold, quiet courtroom, you must first understand how we arrived here. It all fractured, or perhaps it all fell into place around 1:30 a.m. I was in the kitchen, sitting not in a rocking chair but by the bay window overlooking the rain-slicked garden. I was trying to find solace in the low strains of a classical piano piece I was streaming on my phone, something calm, something rational, to keep my fraying nerves from completely unraveling. It was storming outside, the wind howling like a lost soul through the chimneys, but the sound that truly jolted me was the violent jiggling and eventual forced entry of the back door lock. Wesley didn't use the key. He simply muscled his way in. He stumbled into the light, smelling of cheap bourbon, stale smoke, and something acrid, maybe cheap cologne, maybe just pure self-hatred. I remained motionless. He didn't bother to take off his sodden coat. He merely ripped a heavy, framed portrait of his father and me, our wedding day, off the wall and sent it crashing into the corner. The sound of splintering wood and shattered glass was deafening. He didn't even flinch. He walked into the kitchen, his anger a visible, pulsing aura. When he saw me, his frustration seemed to instantly find a target. He started screaming, a long, rambling accusation that my devotion to this museum of a house and the ghost of his father was the reason his life had stalled. I stood up slowly. I knew my words were futile, but I had to try. "Wesley, please go to bed. You're drunk and you need to sleep this off." That was the spark. That gentle plea for sobriety was the ultimate insult to his drunken pride. He lunged at me. A 40-year-old man, a man Thomas had raised to be honorable and strong, attacking his aging mother. He grabbed my shoulders, not gently, but like he was trying to tear the flesh from the bone. He shook me with such ferocity that the world dissolved into a sickening blur. I felt the deep vibration of it in my teeth, my joints. Then, with a savage heave, he threw me. I didn't go flying. I was violently hurled across the kitchen. I slammed into the heavy, antique hutch where I kept my best china. My back absorbed the first terrible impact against the solid oak. Then my head whipped backward, striking the thin glass pane of the upper cabinet. The noise was a sharp, dry crack that seemed to silence the rain outside, and he wasn't done. As I lay there, crumpled and winded, gasping for air against the cold tiled floor, he stood over me. He raised his hand. The movement was slow, deliberate, a horrifying tableau. Then he brought it down. The slap across my face was a deafening eruption. The pain was instant, blinding, and hot. I tasted blood immediately, metallic, bitter, where my lips split open against my own teeth. I didn't scream, I didn't beg, I just stayed there, a broken doll on the floor, staring up at the son I had sacrificed everything for. And Wesley. He looked down at me for a moment, a fleeting, horrifying moment where I searched his eyes for recognition and found none. Then he simply scoffed, turned, and climbed the stairs. The sound of his heavy, retreating footsteps and the eventual crash of his bedroom door were the last sounds of his tyranny. The silence that followed was not an empty space. It was a suffocating pressure, the kind of stillness after a bomb has dropped. I was left alone, bleeding in the sanctuary of my kitchen. I didn't move for a long time. When I finally dragged myself to the small powder room, I looked in the mirror. My face was distorted, the initial shock wearing off to reveal the true damage, the split lip, the quickly darkening bruise on my cheekbone. And in that moment, looking into the eyes of the terrified, wounded woman staring back, I saw something shift. The victim died. The matriarch, the survivor, the woman Thomas had loved and respected, was reborn. I knew with absolute certainty that this was the last time, the final humiliation. I went back to the kitchen. I cleaned the blood from the tile and carefully swept up the glass shards from the fallen portrait. Instead of dissolving into despair, I walked to my pantry and took out the tools of my trade: flour, butter, sugar. I needed to work. I needed a tangible focus for the cold, meticulous plan forming in my mind. I pulled out my new set of stainless steel baking trays. They were heavy, sturdy, a beautiful copper color, a gift from my sister, Clara, who said they were the best for evenly baked goods. I used them all night. While Wesley slept off his rage upstairs, deaf to the howling storm, I baked. I baked dozens upon dozens of lemon tarts and miniature savory quiches. Every time I worked the dough, I thought about the phone calls I had to make. Every tart I shaped, every quiche I filled with Gruyere and herbs clarified the steps of my plan. My battle would not be fought with shouts or tears. It would be fought with the unwavering authority of the law, seasoned with cold, calculated motherly love, the kind that sometimes means letting go. By the time the sun began to paint the sky with thin strokes of gray and pink, the kitchen smelled heavenly, a fragrance of lemon zest and baked butter, a perfect lie spread over the truth of the broken woman and the monster upstairs. I set the table with a formal elegance I usually reserved for Christmas. The delicate blue and white porcelain china that had been Thomas's mother's, the heavy sterling silver, the perfectly pressed linen. The table was a picture of peace and domestic bliss. At 7:30 a.m. I was dressed, composed, and ready. The aroma of strong, freshly brewed coffee and baked goods wafted up the stairs, a silent, irresistible lure. I knew he would come down. He would expect the routine, the cleanup, the quiet forgiveness that enabled his behavior. He had no idea that forgiveness was no longer on the menu. Justice was. The clock struck 8:00 a.m. and the doorbell chimed, a civilized, gentle sound that contrasted violently with the chaos of the night. Wesley entered the dining room precisely as I finished placing a small, perfect bloom from my camellia bush in a vase. He walked in, took his seat, grabbed that scone, and then he saw the man sitting next to me, the man who rose from the chair and extended a hand, the silver badge gleaming faintly in the morning light. "Good morning, Mr. Vance," the man said, his voice deep and entirely professional. "My name is Detective Marcus Thorne. We need to have a serious conversation about the events of last night." Wesley's world had just imploded. And I, Eleanor Vance, was ready to pick up the pieces, the ones he broke and the ones I carefully put back together myself. The buttery scone hit the floor, scattering crumbs like white flag debris. Wesley's eyes were locked onto the detective, a man whose presence in our sacred family dining room was a physical violation of everything Wesley believed he was entitled to. Detective Thorne, a tall, impeccably dressed man of about 40, stood with the relaxed but authoritative posture of someone who had seen this exact scene play out 100 times. The shock, the realization, the immediate slide into panic and denial. Wesley tried to recover, his mind clearly racing to find the familiar path of bluster and manipulation. He looked from the detective to me, desperately seeking the usual signal, the soft, appeasing glance, the hasty apology. He found nothing but the cold, clear blue of my eyes, which were entirely devoid of pity. What is this, Mom?" he stammered, his voice cracking on the last word. He tried to laugh, a dry, pathetic sound. "A joke? You called the police over a little disagreement." Detective Thorne didn't even glance at me. He kept his steady gaze fixed on Wesley. "I'm here regarding a reported incident of domestic assault that occurred at approximately 1:45 a.m. this morning, Mr. Vance. I believe your mother, Mrs. Vance, has some injuries that need to be documented. And you, sir, have some questions to answer." Wesley finally looked at my face, really looked at it, perhaps for the first time since he had inflicted the damage. The swelling on my lip, the sickly purple patch under my eye, the tremor that was no longer in my hands but was now beginning to shake his own large frame. The physical evidence of his transgression, laid bare in the bright morning light, was suddenly undeniable. He rose halfway from his seat, his hands flat on the table, trying to regain his position of dominance. "This is outrageous. You can't just come into my home. I demand to know who filed this report. Mom, tell him this is a mistake. You know how I get when I'm stressed. It's just a family matter, nothing for the police." I picked up my coffee cup, the delicate porcelain surprisingly warm and solid in my hands. I took a slow sip, letting the aroma of the rich dark roast fill the space that Wesley's panic shouting was trying to occupy. Only then did I answer, my voice flat, calm, and utterly final. "I filed the report, Wesley, and this is not a mistake. It's the consequence of your choices." The effect of those simple, measured words was astonishing. It was as if I had physically struck him again. His bluster evaporated, replaced by a raw, naked horror. He looked betrayed, shattered not by the legal jeopardy he was now in, but by the cold severance of the maternal lifeline he had always taken for granted. Before he could spiral further into accusation, the doorbell chimed again, precisely on schedule. "That," I said, placing my cup down gently, "will be my attorney, Mr. Harlan, and a witness I asked to join us. I prefer to conduct all future discussions regarding my legal options and your place in this house through counsel." This was the end of the line. The breakfast table was indeed a courtroom, and Wesley was the accused, stripped of his power, facing a jury of consequences. To truly understand the weight of this morning, we need to rewind a few hours past the moment of the assault, to the quiet time when my own resolve was being forged in the heat of my kitchen. It was just past 4:30 a.m. I had just completed my second batch of lemon tarts, their fragrance doing a commendable job of chasing away the lingering smell of bourbon. My body ached, the back pain was a dull, constant throb, and my head felt fragile like a cracked eggshell. I walked over to the kitchen counter to turn off the oven, and my eyes fell on the digital photo frame that sat beside the sugar bowl. It was an anniversary gift from Thomas a few years before he passed, a sleek modern device that constantly cycled through our cherished memories. Just as I looked, a picture flashed onto the screen. Wesley, about 10 years old, standing on a beach in the Outer Banks, sand in his hair, his face split by a gap-toothed grin. He was holding up a perfect sandcastle that Thomas had helped him build, looking so proud, so innocent. Thomas was crouched beside him, his arm around his son's shoulder, his eyes radiating pure, unadulterated paternal pride. That image, a snapshot of pure, uncomplicated love, hit me with a force greater than Wesley's hand. I leaned heavily against the counter, the cool tile a welcome anchor for my spinning head. I closed my eyes, and I wasn't in my broken kitchen anymore. I was back on that sun-drenched beach in the summer of 1995. I remembered the smell of salt and copper tone. Wesley had spent hours struggling with the wet sand, his patience waning. Thomas had knelt beside him, patiently showing him the trick to making the ramparts strong, mixing seawater just right. When the castle was finally complete, Wesley's triumphant yell had been the sweetest sound in the world. "Daddy, look, we did it." Thomas had looked at me, winking over Wesley's head. "He's got that Vance determination, Eleanor. He'll make something of himself." Where did that determined, loving boy go? Where did he trade his sandcastle for a bottle? The frame cycled again, a picture from Wesley's university graduation. He wore the crimson robe of the University of South Carolina, his diploma rolled tightly in his hand. I was beaming beside him, Thomas's favorite amethyst pin fastened securely to my dress. Wesley was the first in either of our families to finish college. The entire community had celebrated. That pride, it had been my oxygen for years. Wesley's success was my tribute to Thomas, the proof that I hadn't failed after Thomas had been tragically killed in a crane accident at the Charleston port. Wesley was just 18 then, just starting college. At Thomas's funeral, he hadn't cried publicly. He stood tall, a pillar of young strength for me. That night, though, he held me close in the darkness and vowed, "I'll be your rock, Mama, I'll make Daddy proud." And for a long time he was. He graduated with honors, got a good job in finance right here in Charleston, bought a reliable car. He took me to the First Baptist Church of Charleston every Sunday, holding my hand as we walked up the steps, his deep baritone joining the hymns, echoing Thomas's own voice. But then, about 4 years ago, the cracks began. It started with his job, the economy shifted. His department was restructured. He didn't lose his job entirely, but his role was gutted, his title diminished, his salary reduced. For Wesley, who had always defined his manhood by his status and success, the blow was catastrophic. He felt that the legacy of strength Thomas had left him, the legacy of the successful man, had been publicly stripped away. He didn't tell me the whole truth. He just became withdrawn, bitter. He started coming home later. The polite, measured quiet of the responsible man was replaced by a sharp, brittle silence full of resentment. I began to smell the liquor, first faintly, then strongly. Then came the money issues. "Mom, can I hold on to 300 until payday? The car needs a tune-up." I always agreed. He never paid it back. 300 became 500, then 1,000. The first time he yelled at me, truly yelled with a frightening fury, was over a simple thing, a faulty window latch in the parlor. I'd asked him several times to fix it. That Saturday afternoon, I gently reminded him. He was on the sofa, scrolling angrily on his tablet. He didn't look up. "It's a hurricane shutter, Wesley. It needs to be secured before the next storm." He slammed the tablet down. The delicate crystal coaster jumped. He stood up, and for the first time he was simply a large, menacing man, not my son. "You're worried about a damn latch," he snarled, his eyes blazing with a poisonous frustration. "The world is falling apart, I'm being humiliated every day, and all you care about is keeping this house perfectly preserved like a damn tomb. If Dad were here, he would have fixed my life, not just this stupid window." I retreated then, physically stepping back until my hand rested on the cool marble of the fireplace mantel. The shock was paralyzing. That nasty, corrosive resentment in his eyes, it was entirely new, entirely terrifying. He didn't touch me that day, but he didn't have to. The venom in his words was worse than a blow. He grabbed his keys and stormed out, leaving me alone in the oppressive silence, listening to the loose latch rattle in the wind. The house, once my haven, became my prison. I learned his patterns. The way he slammed the gate meant a night of shouting. The way he was unnaturally quiet meant days of punishing, icy hostility. I stopped having my friends over. I couldn't bear the shame. My best friend Charlotte would call. "Eleanor, are you feeling well? I haven't seen you at the bridge club." "Oh, Charlotte," I would lie, a false, cheerful lilt in my voice, "just too busy with tax season. I'm fine, dear." The financial control escalated. He stopped asking to borrow. He started using my credit card for unexplained cash withdrawals and expensive bar tabs. When I confronted him with the statements, he simply sneered. "It's Thomas's money and I'm Thomas's son. You think I don't deserve it after what I've been through?" He was rewriting our history to make himself the victim and me the cold, withholding matriarch. A few months ago, the last flicker of decency seemed to extinguish. He came home euphoric one evening, having won some money gambling. He was loud, boisterous, and suddenly wanted my attention. I was already exhausted, wanting only the blessed peace of my bed. "Son, I'm going upstairs now, I'm tired," I told him gently. His face transformed instantly. The false joy vanished. "Of course, now that I'm feeling good, you run away. But when I'm miserable, you just sit there with that damn martyr look, waiting for me to fail again, right?" He blocked the doorway to the hall. He spoke quietly, but the words were pure sulfuric acid. "You like this, Mom, you like being the saint. The holy widow who suffers for her wretched son. That's what keeps you feeling important, doesn't it?" He didn't touch me, but I felt myself shrinking, dissolving under the weight of his psychological assault. I went upstairs, locked my door, and cried, silent, muffled sobs into my pillow, denying him the satisfaction of my breakdown. But last night was different. The line he crossed was physical, violent, and utterly unforgivable. I returned to the present moment, back in the quiet kitchen. The digital frame now displayed a photo of Thomas and me on our honeymoon, young, hopeful, inseparable. "Oh, Thomas," I whispered into the pre-dawn air, "the man you raised is gone, and I, your wife, must now face this storm alone." I had time for one more batch of savory quiches. I set out the eggs, the cream, and the Gruyere. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 5:00 a.m. The deep, melancholic tone reminded me that time was running out. I needed to act. My back ached, my lip pulsed, but the pain was a grounding force. It was proof that the violence was real, the betrayal absolute. The quiches baked to a perfect golden brown, their crusts flaky and crisp. They were not a meal, they were a preparation. I then picked up my phone. It was time for the essential calls. First, Detective Thorne. Second, my attorney, Mr. Harlan. And third, my dear Charlotte, who needed to know the truth and who needed to be here not just as a friend, but as a reliable witness to the documentation of my injuries and to Wesley's immediate reaction. The world was about to wake up, and when it did, Eleanor Vance would no longer be a victim. She would be a force. The moment Detective Thorne introduced himself, Wesley's composure had not just cracked, it had disintegrated. The fear in his eyes was profound, the terror of a man whose carefully constructed fantasy, the fantasy that his mother would always shield him, was collapsing into reality. He looked wildly around the dining room as if searching for an escape route, but the heavy oak doors felt miles away. The arrival of Mr. Harlan, my attorney, and Charlotte, my best friend, sealed his fate. Mr. Harlan, a sharp, older gentleman known for his meticulous and calm courtroom demeanor, entered first, carrying a slim leather briefcase. He nodded respectfully to the detective and then, without a single word to Wesley, placed his briefcase next to my chair, signaling his presence and his loyalty. Then came Charlotte. Charlotte Dubois is a magnificent woman, sharp as a tack and utterly fearless. She had been my friend since childhood, and she knew the true measure of my late husband, Thomas. She wore a tailored black suit, a striking contrast to the cheerful morning light, and her expression was one of controlled fury. Wesley always underestimated Charlotte, dismissing her as a harmless gossip. He couldn't have been more wrong. She walked directly to the table, and instead of taking the empty seat, she approached me. She didn't speak, she didn't have to. She gently lifted the edge of my hair, exposing the painful, angry purple mark already forming on my cheekbone. She took a slow, deliberate look, and the intake of her breath was audible. "Eleanor," she whispered, her voice tight with suppressed rage. Then she shifted her gaze to Wesley. Wesley flinched under her stare. It was a gaze that didn't just judge him as a criminal, but as a moral failure, a look far colder and more devastating than the detective's professional scrutiny. "Wesley," Charlotte said, her voice now dangerously low, "you put your hands on your mother. The mother who gave up everything for you. The mother who has spent 4 years covering your shame. You are worse than a street dog, you are a disgrace to Thomas's name." The shame, the raw, public humiliation delivered by someone who had watched him grow up, finally broke him. He crumbled back into his chair, the picture of impotent fury. Detective Thorne stepped forward, his voice cutting through the heavy silence. "Mr. Vance, your mother has provided a statement detailing the assault. She has also provided a sworn affidavit regarding the financial exploitation and ongoing emotional abuse over the past 2 years. Given the visible injuries, I am going to ask you to cooperate. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you." Wesley just stared, speechless, as the detective systematically, calmly, and professionally dismantled his life. I watched him. I watched the arrogant mask fall away to reveal the frightened, petulant man underneath, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no lingering love, only a profound, exhausted emptiness. The fear, the pity, the self-blame that had kept me silent for so long had all been burned away in the fire of his violence. "Mr. Harlan," my lawyer finally spoke, addressing the detective. "Detective Thorne, Mrs. Vance has made her decision. We are prepared to fully cooperate with the formal charges of domestic battery. Furthermore, Mrs. Vance wishes to initiate the immediate legal proceedings for a permanent restraining order, and as she is the sole owner of this property, a notice of eviction. Her son, Mr. Wesley Vance, will be required to vacate the premises today." Eviction, the word hung in the air like a death sentence. Wesley's home. The beautiful Victorian house that Thomas and I had built our lives in, the house that Wesley had always claimed was his by birthright, was about to reject him. Wesley finally found his voice, a high-pitched, desperate cry. "Eviction? Mom, you can't. This is my house. Where will I go? You're doing this over a little fight? You're throwing your own son out on the street. You're trying to ruin me." My voice, when I spoke, was gentle, which made it all the more terrifying. I reached across the table and picked up one of my perfect blueberry scones. "I am not throwing you out, Wesley," I said, my gaze unwavering. "I am simply taking back what you tried to steal. This house stopped being your home the moment you broke the glass of your father's memory and moments later raised your hand against the woman who bore you. You ruined yourself, son. I am merely calling in the debt." Detective Thorne then took over, his professionalism demanding action. He instructed Wesley to retrieve any essential belongings he would need immediately. Wesley, realizing the fight was over, stumbled up the stairs, a broken man heading to pack a broken life. While he was upstairs, Charlotte finally sat down, covering my hand with hers. "Oh, Eleanor, you are the bravest woman I know." Mr. Harlan, meanwhile, was all business. He spread out a few documents on the lace runner, the restraining order, the eviction notice, and a formal document I had drafted myself the night before. "Mrs. Vance," he confirmed, "this also formalizes the revocation of the power of attorney and your final will. All previous documents naming Mr. Vance as a beneficiary or executor are officially void, effective immediately. Is that correct?" I nodded once firmly. "Correct, Mr. Harlan. My estate, including this house, will be placed into a charitable trust dedicated to the shelter and education of women in domestic crisis. It will be named the Thomas Vance Legacy Fund. Wesley will receive nothing." The decision had been agonizing, a deep, slicing cut to the core of my motherly instincts, but it was the only way to ensure he could never again exploit my hard-won peace. It was the only way to force him to face life, utterly unshielded. The vigil of the night to grasp the depth of that decision, to disinherit my only child. You have to understand the excruciating vigil of the preceding hours, the meticulous mental process that led to my final verdict. After the initial assault, after I had cleaned the blood and swept the glass, I didn't return to bed. I couldn't. The pain in my body was nothing compared to the pain of the revelation. I sat at my kitchen table, the air cooling, the rain still lashing the windows, and I began to write. I wrote a letter to Thomas, a silent conversation with my late husband. "My dearest Thomas, it is 3:45 a.m. I am sitting in our kitchen, the place where we shared our first meal and where I last saw you before you went to the docks. I have a split lip and a bruise on my cheek, courtesy of the boy we raised, our boy Thomas. The one you loved so fiercely. I have tried, my love. I have lied to our friends, I have shielded him from consequences, I have allowed his bitterness to consume my joy and my safety. I thought if I just loved him more, if I just forgave him more easily, the boy you raised would reemerge. But Thomas, that boy is gone. He has traded your honor for cheap liquor and your legacy for entitlement. He believes this house, my body, my very life, is his to use up and discard. He has left me with a choice, to die slowly in my own home, a prisoner of his rage, or to choose life. You taught me to be strong, my Thomas. You taught me that sometimes the hardest love is the truest love. I have made my choice. I will choose life, I will choose peace, and I will choose justice. I will not let your name, your memory, be tied to this hatred any longer. I am sending him away, Thomas. I am setting him adrift. It is the most painful act of my life, but I believe it is the only way to save the soul of the boy we lost. I pray that one day, years from now, stripped of all that he feels entitled to, he will finally remember how to be the man you were proud of. Forgive me, my husband, and guide me, your loving Eleanor. Writing that letter was an act of emotional triage. It defined the problem and prescribed the cure, total separation. After the letter, I moved to the practical steps. At 5:15 a.m., I used my phone to research the legal requirements for a same-day restraining order and temporary eviction in South Carolina, given the clear evidence of physical harm. I needed to act before Wesley woke up, before he could manipulate the situation, before my fear could be weaponized against me again. The biggest step, the most heart-wrenching, was the call to Mr. Harlan. I knew he was an early riser. I called his private line. Mr. Harlan, I began, my voice clear despite the pain. I need you here by 8 a.m. I need a police presence and I need a formal eviction notice prepared and signed immediately. I explained the assault, the years of abuse, the financial control. Mr. Harlan, a man who rarely showed emotion, was silent for a long moment. Eleanor, he finally said, his voice quiet with anger, I have represented your family for 30 years. I am deeply sorry. You should have called me months ago. I know, I admitted, the shame still stinging. But I need you to do one more thing. I need you to come prepared to draw up the papers to disinherit Wesley entirely. He didn't argue. He only said, I understand the wisdom in that, Eleanor. If he has forfeited his right to your safety, he has forfeited his claim to your legacy. I will see you at 8. Next, the call to the police non-emergency line, which led to Detective Thorne. I was firm, articulate, and factual, suppressing all emotion. I was Eleanor Vance, the successful bookkeeper, the community pillar, requesting professional protection from a violent individual. Finally, Charlotte, I needed a witness, someone whose presence would be undeniable. I told her the simple truth. Wesley hit me, Charlotte, and he threw me across the kitchen. He is going to be arrested this morning, and I need you with me. Charlotte's reaction was immediate. I'm there, Eleanor. I'm driving straight over now. Don't unlock the door for anyone but me and the officer. The quiet precision of those phone calls, made while the world slept, was the foundation of my deliverance. I was not plotting revenge. I was securing my survival. I was building a barricade of bureaucracy and law between myself and the man who had tried to break me. By 7:00 a.m., the aroma of coffee and baked goods was thick in the air. The table was set. My resolve was iron. I had exchanged a life of fear for a few hours of painful, resolute action. And now, as Wesley came back down the stairs, carrying a gym bag that held the sum total of his immediate necessities, he saw the 3 people waiting for him: the detective, the lawyer, and the furious friend. He realized too late that this perfect, formal breakfast was not a sign of reconciliation. It was the site of his exile. He stood at the foot of the stairs, looking at the table, at the perfectly arranged scones and quiches. He saw the empty seat where his father used to sit, and he finally saw me. Wesley stood frozen at the foot of the stairs, the cheap canvas gym bag slung over his shoulder, looking pathetic against the backdrop of the elegant, custom-built staircase. He couldn't move. The weight of the 3 pairs of eyes watching him, the professional detachment of Detective Thorne, the controlled severity of Mr. Harlan, and the blazing condemnation of Charlotte, had pinned him in place. But the eyes that held him, the eyes he couldn't tear himself away from, were mine. He finally broke the silence, his voice raw, stripped of the bravado that had fueled him for years. Mom, please, let's just talk. We don't need all this. This theater, we're family, just send them away. We are not a family, Wesley, I corrected him gently but with devastating finality. A family requires respect. You replaced respect with demands and love with violence. You forfeited the right to call this house or me family last night. Detective Thorne stepped forward, holding a printed page, the restraining order. Mr. Vance, this is effective immediately. You are not to come within 500 feet of this residence, your mother, or any property owned by Mrs. Vance. This is a court order. Any violation will result in immediate arrest and forfeiture of bail. You need to sign here acknowledging receipt. Wesley didn't move to take the paper. He looked at me, pleading. But where will I go, Mom? You can't just throw me out with nowhere to go. I have nowhere to live. I have no job. I have no money left. His complaint, centered entirely on his own sudden lack of comfort, was the final defining moment of his entitlement. He had no remorse for the pain he inflicted, only despair for the loss of his safety net. I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on the table. My voice was low and every word was deliberate. Wesley, for the last 4 years, I have covered your rent, paid your bills, absorbed your debt, and endured your cruelty. I have been your safety net, and you used it as a hammock and then as a punching bag. You have a few $1,000s left in the emergency account I set aside for you, money you did not earn. That and the clothes in that bag are the last things you will ever receive from me. You are a 40-year-old man. It is time you finally learned to take care of yourself. Wesley's face crumpled. He was looking at a future he had never planned for, a future without Eleanor Vance to cushion his falls. He was seeing the true face of his self-inflicted ruin. You're doing this because of the money, aren't you? He accused, trying to find a convenient material reason for my betrayal. You care more about the house and Dad's money than your own son. No, Wesley, I said, pointing a finger not at him but at the purple mark blossoming on my cheek. I am doing this because of that, and because of the years of silent fear I endured. I am doing this because I deserve to be safe in my own home. And now you will sign that paper or the detective will escort you in handcuffs. The threat of public, formal arrest, the ultimate shame was enough. Wesley walked over to the table like a sleepwalker. He took the pen Mr. Harlan offered him and scribbled a shaky, angry signature on the restraining order. Detective Thorne stepped in, placing a firm, guiding hand on Wesley's shoulder. Let's go, Mr. Vance. I will drive you to the nearest motel and I will wait outside while you check in. That will be the extent of my assistance. Wesley took one last, long look around the dining room, at the polished mahogany, at the silver, at the lemon tarts I had baked, the last taste of home he would ever have from my hands. His gaze lingered on the empty spot on the wall where his father's portrait had hung before he smashed it. Then he looked at me, his eyes brimming with a hate so profound it almost startled me. I hope you're happy, Mom, he spat. I hope I find peace, Wesley, I countered calmly. Happiness is a luxury you have denied me for a very long time. And then he was gone, led out the front door, past the Spanish moss and the wrought iron gates by a uniformed officer of the law. The sound of the front door closing was not a slam, it was a soft, definitive click. It was the sound of a jail door opening for me and closing on him, the confession and the camellia. The silence that rushed back into the house was not the heavy, suffocating silence of fear, but a vast, liberating emptiness. Charlotte immediately rushed to the door to lock it behind the detective. Thank God, she breathed, leaning against the cool wood. Eleanor, are you all right, Mr. Harlan was already stacking his papers, businesslike but clearly relieved. We need to finalize the trust documents immediately, Mrs. Vance. We should also arrange for a security assessment and a panic button installation. I waved them both to the table. Sit, both of you, please have a scone, Charlotte. You need it, Mr. Harlan, the quiche is still warm. They both sat, though neither touched the food immediately. I knew they needed to know the whole truth, the parts I hadn't told the police for fear of sounding like a madwoman. There's something else, I began, my voice trembling slightly for the first time since the assault. It wasn't just the abuse, it was the slow, deliberate erosion of my spirit, the way he used Thomas against me. I reached for the small vase I had placed in the center of the table. It held a single, perfect white camellia just opening in the cool morning light. Thomas gave me camellias every Christmas, I explained, running a thumb over the soft, waxy petal. He said they represented eternal love and fidelity. They were my favorite. I told them about the incident in the kitchen a few months ago, the night he blocked the door and spewed his poison. He told me that I liked seeing him suffer, that my love was conditional. He said that I only cared about being the holy widow who sacrificed everything for her wretched son, that the house was a tomb I worshipped more than I loved him. Charlotte gasped softly, covering her mouth. And I believed him, Charlotte. In those moments I truly believed that perhaps I had failed him somehow, that my grief over Thomas had overshadowed my duty to him, that I was somehow responsible for his bitterness. That is pure psychological abuse, Eleanor, Mr. Harlan stated firmly. It's the tactic of an emotional parasite designed to strip you of your self-worth so you have no strength to fight back. You were not responsible for his bitterness, you were merely the target. I know that now, I admitted, my voice catching slightly. But it wasn't until last night when he struck me that the true nature of his resentment became clear. It wasn't about the job or the money or even the loss of his father. It was about power. He hated me because I was the final, unmovable authority in his life, the one person he couldn't control, the keeper of the house, the keeper of Thomas's memory. I explained how, after he left, I hadn't been afraid of him anymore, but afraid of my own continuing inaction. That's why I cleaned the house and baked, I concluded. Not for him, but for me. I needed to restore order to my chaos. I needed to prove that my hands could still create beauty and structure, even after they had been shaken and bruised by his violence. The baking was my act of spiritual resistance. The scent of those tarts was the smell of my freedom. Charlotte reached over the table and pulled me into a tight, fierce embrace. You should never have had to face that alone, never. I know, I murmured into her shoulder, but the Lord gives you the strength you need exactly when you need it most. Last night I got mine. We spent the next hour working with Mr. Harlan. He dictated the terms of the trust, the Thomas Vance Legacy Fund, which would use the entirety of my estate and the proceeds from the eventual sale of the house to create a safe haven for older women escaping abuse in the Charleston area. Wesley will never know, I stated clearly. He will never benefit, and he will never know that the house he tried to claim for himself will now serve the very women whose suffering he mirrored in my life. The legal work was finished. The decision was sealed, Mr. Harlan, finally allowing himself a break, reached for a fork and tried a small piece of the savory quiche. He chewed slowly, his eyes closed. Eleanor, he said, opening his eyes, this is superb. You truly are a remarkable woman. It was a small, normal compliment, but after a night of such horror, it sounded like a benediction. The final step by mid-morning, Detective Thorne called me back. He confirmed that Wesley had been processed, booked on charges of degree battery, and released on a substantial bond that his friends had scraped together. He's been formally served the restraining order, Mrs. Vance, the detective reported. He is currently at the Sea Island Motel. He knows the rules. We will be patrolling the area, and Mr. Harlan is right. Please consider the panic button. I will, detective, thank you. The house was empty, quiet, and profoundly mine again. Charlotte stayed with me for the rest of the day, helping me take down the antique hutch that Wesley had slammed me into. I couldn't bear to look at it anymore. We replaced the glass on Thomas's portrait and hung it back up, not in the hall where it could be a target, but carefully placed on my mantel, presiding over the room. As the sun began to set over the moss-draped oaks outside, painting the house in soft, forgiving light, I felt the exhaustion finally overtake me. The pain in my back and head was a fierce companion now, but it was the clean pain of recovery, not the sick fear of waiting for the next blow. I walked through the house, touching the velvet of the parlor sofa, the cool marble of the fireplace. It was safe, it was mine, the quiet was a gift. Before I went to bed, I made one last stop in the kitchen. I looked at the digital photo frame. It was cycling through pictures now, photos of Thomas, photos of my parents, photos of peaceful moments, untainted by the man who had briefly polluted them. I knew the road ahead would be difficult. The court hearings, the paperwork, the inevitable emotional fallout, but I would face it all. I had chosen life. I finally allowed myself to cry one last time, not tears of pain or fear, but tears of pure, overwhelming relief. The next morning dawned bright, the rain finally gone, leaving the air sparkling and fresh, a cleansing that seemed to mirror the newfound clarity in my soul. My body, however, was in rebellion. The full force of the trauma had set in. My back was a sheet of tight, searing agony, and the throbbing in my head made it difficult to focus. Yet the physical pain was a small price for the release of emotional tension that had held me hostage for years. Charlotte had insisted on staying. She was sleeping soundly in the guest room, exhausted from our vigil and the emotional labor of the day before. I crept out of bed, carefully navigating the stiffness in my joints, and made my way to the kitchen. I didn't need to cook today. The kitchen was already silent, orderly, and peaceful. I sat at the table, savoring the solitude, sipping a cup of strong tea. I was surrounded by the legal documents, the restraining order, the eviction notice, and the draft of the Thomas Vance Legacy Fund Trust, a thick pile of papers representing my emancipation. My thoughts drifted back to Thomas, as they often did. Not the ghost Wesley accused me of worshipping, but the tangible memory of the man who had laid the foundation of my strength. I realized that my ability to act decisively, without hesitation, wasn't born of sudden courage, but was merely the application of lessons Thomas had taught me. Thomas had been a master carpenter at the port, a man who understood structure. He often told me, Eleanor, when a storm is coming, you don't pray it away. You reinforce the foundation, you board up the windows, and you prepare for the worst. You confront the damage before the wind takes the whole house. I saw my life with Wesley in those terms now. I had seen the early cracks, the financial irresponsibility, the verbal abuse, but I had merely patched the surface with forgiveness and money. The foundation, our family dynamic, had been rotting underneath, and only an earthquake like the physical assault could force me to acknowledge the need for total demolition and reconstruction. I reached for my phone and started scrolling through my contacts, looking for an old name. I needed to solidify the structure of the Thomas Vance Legacy Fund, the trust that would ultimately inherit my house and my estate. I needed a second executor, someone unconnected to Charleston society and its inevitable whispers, someone who understood both the law and the human heart. I found the number for Mrs. Imogen Sterling. Imogen was Thomas's cousin, a fiercely independent woman who had left South Carolina decades ago to become a civil rights attorney in Atlanta. She was now semi-retired, a formidable matriarch known for her unflinching sense of justice. She and Thomas had been close, sharing a bond forged in childhood resilience. I hesitated for only a moment, then dialed her number. It was early, but I knew Imogen was an early riser. Hello. Her voice, though aged, was still sharp with the distinct clipped cadence of the Vance family. Imogen, it's Eleanor Vance, Thomas's wife. Silence stretched across the line. Eleanor, what a surprise, we haven't spoken since Thomas's funeral. Is everything all right? You sound strained. I took a deep breath. No, Imogen, nothing is all right, but I'm about to make it so. I recounted the events of the last 4 years, condensing the agony into facts, presenting the truth of Wesley's decline, his financial exploitation, and culminating in the violence of 2 nights prior. I described the current situation, the detective, the restraining order, the eviction, and the creation of the Thomas Vance Legacy Fund. I heard the sharp hiss of her breath. That boy, he laid hands on you. Eleanor, why didn't you call me? I could have handled this years ago. I know, I confessed. Shame, Imogen, the most paralyzing thing is shame. I couldn't bear the thought of admitting that the son I raised, the young scholar, was a predator under my own roof. Shame belongs to the abuser, not the victim, Eleanor, she countered sternly. But I hear the resolution in your voice now. What do you need from me? I told her about the trust. I'm naming you the co-executor, Imogen. I need your legal expertise to ensure that not a single cent of this estate can ever be accessed by Wesley, under any circumstances, and that the fund is used precisely for its purpose, sheltering and empowering older women who have suffered domestic violence. I need your iron will to protect this legacy. Imogen didn't hesitate. Consider it done, Eleanor. I will fly to Charleston this afternoon. I want to see this trust and I want to see you. I also want to speak to this Detective Thorne. And I want to see the face of that boy when he realizes he has been entirely cut off from the easy life you provided. Her acceptance was a massive relief. With Imogen involved, I knew the legal fortification of my future was absolute, the ghosts of entitlement. While I was on the phone with Imogen, Charlotte awoke and came into the kitchen, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. She stopped short when she saw my face. Eleanor, you look exhausted. You need to rest. I can handle the calls, the paperwork. I am resting, Charlotte, I interrupted. This quiet, this certainty, this is the first true rest I've had in years. Charlotte sat down and her gaze fell on the thick stack of papers on the table. You really did it, didn't you? You didn't leave him anything. Nothing of substance, I confirmed. Only the clothes on his back and the tiny remnant of the emergency fund I always kept separate. We fell into a comfortable silence, only broken by the soft clinking of our cups. Then Charlotte spoke, her voice reflective. Do you know what always mystified me about Wesley? His complete inability to see his father's work as anything but a stepping stone for him. Thomas worked with his hands. He was a foreman, a respected leader at the port. Wesley always spoke of Thomas's life as a burden Thomas endured for his sake. It was never about pride in his father's labor. It was only about the perceived reward he was owed. Entitlement, I murmured, the word tasting bitter. It's a sickness that consumes the soul. I thought about the night of the faucet incident, the first time Wesley's rage had surfaced. If Daddy were here, he wouldn't have let this happen. He was a real man, he would have handled things. He didn't want Thomas. He wanted the idea of Thomas, the omnipotent father who could solve all his problems and shield him from the consequences of the adult world. When Thomas died, Wesley internalized the trauma not as grief, but as a void he felt entitled to have filled by me, by the house, and by Thomas's insurance money. The fact was, Thomas had built this house and our life on the foundation of personal responsibility. He worked hard because he respected his ability to provide. He never bought anything he couldn't pay cash for. He always told Wesley, a Vance man stands on his own 2 feet. You don't ask for respect, you earn it with the integrity of your actions. Wesley had traded that foundation for a life built on quicksand. The moment his job was restructured, the moment he faced real adversity, he didn't revert to Thomas's teachings. He retreated into the comfort of my enabling. The inheritance he expected was simply the final, ultimate form of enabling. By disinheriting him, I was forcing him to finally stand on the foundation of his own actions, however shaky that ground might be. It was the last, most painful act of parenting I would ever perform. Preparation for the storm the day was dedicated to fortification. Mr. Harlan arrived mid-morning with the security team, who installed a state-of-the-art alarm system and a panic button under my bedside table. Every window and door was checked, reinforced, and secured. Then, Imogen arrived from Atlanta. She was imposing, even in her 70s, with a spine straight as a ruler and eyes that missed nothing. She didn't hug me immediately. Instead, she took one look at my bruised face and her expression hardened into pure glacial anger. The first thing we do, Eleanor, is get you to a doctor for a thorough examination. Every injury, every ache, every complaint documented and linked to the police report. This is not about healing right now, it is about evidence. Imogen was all business, all law, she and Mr. Harlan spent hours going over the trust documents, refining the language to make it utterly airtight, ensuring that no loophole, no future marriage, no clever legal maneuver could ever allow Wesley to claim ownership. As they worked, Imogen questioned me extensively, not just about the assault, but about the psychology of the abuse. Did he ever threaten you financially? Constantly. He used the mortgage, which I pay entirely from Thomas's pension and my business, as leverage. He'd say, "Don't forget whose money pays for this roof, Mom." Did he isolate you? Yes, I stopped having Charlotte and my other friends over. I lied about my health to avoid having anyone see the tension. Imogen nodded, marking her notes. Excellent. Isolation is a classic tactic. You were a textbook victim, Eleanor, until you chose to become a survivor. She paused, looking out the dining room window at the moss-draped oak tree Thomas had planted when Wesley was born. You have done the right thing, Eleanor. The pain of cutting him off is temporary. The shame of permitting his abuse would have been permanent. Thomas would be immensely proud of your strength and your decision to turn this pain into a legacy of help for other women. He always believed in lifting people up, not dragging them down. Her words, that Thomas would be proud, were the balm I needed. It was the confirmation that my verdict had been just, not merely vengeful. The Thomas Vance Legacy Fund was not an act of spite. It was an act of true stewardship, turning a house of sorrow into a lighthouse of hope. The afternoon was a relentless march of legal and physical protection. I signed the finalized trust documents, officially transferring the house's ownership upon my death to the fund, and immediately naming Imogen and Mr. Harlan as interim co-executors in case of my incapacitation. The house was now legally protected, its future assured. As the sun began to sink again, I felt prepared. The foundation was reinforced. The storm was confronted. Now I just had to wait for the legal battle to begin. I knew Wesley would fight the restraining order and the charges, but he would be fighting not just me, but the full, combined force of the law, my unflinching attorney and the fearsome Imogen Sterling. I had done everything I could. I looked around the quiet, secured room. It was finally, irrevocably mine again. The first few weeks following the assault were a whirlwind of documentation, recovery, and quiet preparation. My life, once stagnant and dictated by Wesley's moods, was now a disciplined, proactive routine. I attended physical therapy for my back, consulted with a neurologist for the lingering headaches, and most importantly, spent hours in the company of Charlotte and Imogen, building the infrastructure for the Thomas Vance Legacy Fund. Imogen, true to her word, was a force of nature. She used her legal connections to ensure the police report was handled without delay. She also secured the expertise of a financial forensics team to audit all of Wesley's transactions against my accounts over the past 4 years, compiling irrefutable evidence of financial exploitation to present in court. The day of the preliminary hearing for the restraining order arrived 3 weeks after the assault. The courtroom, located in the historic Charleston County Courthouse, was a grand, intimidating space, heavy with dark wood and echoing with the solemnity of the law. I arrived with Imogen and Mr. Harlan, dressed in a simple but dignified navy suit. I insisted on no makeup, allowing the faint yellowing of the bruise on my cheekbone to remain visible, a quiet testament to the truth. Wesley was already there, seated at the defense table with a hastily retained, visibly uncomfortable public defender. Wesley looked dreadful. He was thinner, his skin pallid, and his eyes were bloodshot and deeply shadowed. The entitlement was still there, but it was overlaid with a thin veneer of fear and genuine misery. Living without his safety net, even for a few weeks, had taken its toll. He looked like a man who hadn't slept well since he'd been thrown out of the house. Our eyes met across the courtroom. His were full of resentment and a strange, desperate hope, the hope that I would still relent, that I would signal a maternal surrender. I met his gaze with absolute neutrality, a face stripped of all emotion. I was no longer his mother in this room. I was the plaintiff, the victim, and the witness. The judge, a formidable woman named Judge Thompson, opened the proceedings. The hearing was brief, focused entirely on the facts of the assault and the necessity of the order. Mr. Harlan spoke first, presenting the police report, the photographs of my injuries, and the doctor's report detailing the contusions and the mild concussion. Then Imogen stood, and her presentation was the fatal blow. She didn't speak about the slap, she spoke about the systematic destruction of a life. "Your Honor," Imogen began, her voice carrying clear authority, "the petitioner, Eleanor Vance, did not file this restraining order merely to protect herself from a single act of battery. She filed it to protect herself from a continuous 4-year campaign of financial, psychological, and physical abuse perpetrated by her adult son, Mr. Wesley Vance, who has lived for years as a parasite on her grief and her goodwill." She then detailed the audit findings. She showed the judge an itemized list of Wesley's credit card charges: bars, high-stakes poker sites, liquor store runs, all paid for by my credit line. She showed the bank transfers from my private savings account that I had been forced to make to cover his bounce checks. In total, Your Honor, Imogen concluded, her voice rising slightly, Mr. Vance exploited his grieving, elderly mother for over $120,000, money that was the inheritance intended for him, money that Mrs. Vance worked her entire life to save, money he squandered while verbally assaulting her and ultimately, violently laying hands upon her. Wesley's public defender weakly objected, calling the financial evidence irrelevant to the assault charge. Judge Thompson dismissed the objection with a sharp wave of her hand. It is entirely relevant to the pattern of abuse and the necessity of a permanent order. Continue, counselor. When I took the stand, I kept my narrative simple, factual, and chronological. I described the argument over the keys, the shattering of Thomas's framed portrait, the violent shaking, the impact against the hutch, the fall to the floor, and finally the slap. I kept my eyes fixed on the judge, determined not to give Wesley the satisfaction of my pain. Why did you not report this sooner, Mrs. Vance? Judge Thompson asked, her expression serious. Because, Your Honor, I replied, my voice unwavering, he is my son. I was afraid that by reporting him I would ruin his life, the life his father dreamed for him. I was afraid of the shame, but when he struck me I realized that by protecting him I was allowing him to destroy my life. I realized my silence had become a form of enabling, and that the only way to save myself and perhaps one day to shock him into self-correction was to break that silence with the full force of the law. The judge looked at Wesley, who was slumped in his seat, defeated. His public defender offered a paltry defense: temporary intoxication, high stress due to unemployment, and a plea for a mother's forgiveness. Judge Thompson delivered her ruling with swift, cold clarity. The court finds the testimony of Mrs. Vance credible and compelling. The physical evidence is undeniable, and the pattern of abuse is clear. Mr. Wesley Vance has exhibited a profound and escalating lack of respect for his mother's person, property, and finances. He has created a climate of fear and violence. The court hereby grants a permanent restraining order against Mr. Wesley Vance, effective immediately for a period of 5 years. He is to remain at least 500 feet from the petitioner and her residence at all times. She then looked directly at Wesley. Mr. Vance, this is your wake-up call. Your mother has done more than save herself. She has handed you a second chance at life, stripped of the luxuries you abused. Do not test this order, you have been warned. The gavel fell with a sharp, decisive crack. The aftermath of victory, we left the courtroom quickly. Wesley stayed seated, burying his face in his hands. It was over. The physical and legal wall between us was now absolute. Outside the courtroom, the victory was bittersweet. There was no celebration, only the heavy reality of what I had been forced to do. Imogen, I murmured, leaning against the cool stone pillar outside the courthouse, I just destroyed my son's life. No, Eleanor, Imogen corrected, placing a firm hand on my shoulder. You stopped him from destroying yours, and more importantly, you stopped him from destroying his own life by holding him accountable for the first time. Destruction came when he raised his hand. This is merely the necessary consequence. We then had the difficult task of making the court ruling public, not in the news but within our close-knit community. Thomas and I had deep ties to our church, the First Baptist Church of Charleston. I knew the rumors would already be flying, but I felt a moral obligation to be truthful, especially to the seniors who had admired Wesley for so long. I asked Charlotte to handle the communication. She drafted a brief, dignified statement that avoided graphic details, but confirmed the necessity of the restraining order due to escalating domestic issues requiring legal intervention. The reaction from the community was immediate and divided. Some were sympathetic, showering me with calls of support and quiet visits. Others, mostly those who only saw the successful facade Wesley had presented, were judgmental. How could Eleanor do that to her own son? Wesley's just stressed. He needs his mother, not the police. She should have kept it quiet for the sake of the family name. But I no longer cared about the whispers. My true community, Charlotte, Imogen, Mr. Harlan, and the few elders who truly knew my integrity, rallied around me. The financial audit continued, revealing the depth of Wesley's exploitation. It turned out he hadn't just used my credit cards. He had subtly altered the beneficiary forms for Thomas's small life insurance policy, naming himself as the primary receiver, bypassing the legal trust established for my benefit. Fortunately, because I still held the original copies, Mr. Harlan was able to legally challenge and reverse the attempted fraud immediately. Imogen looked at the documents with disgust. He wasn't just squandering your money, Eleanor. He was actively trying to set himself up to rob you of your future security. That cold, calculating betrayal cemented my decision about the estate. Wesley was not just a lost boy, he was a cynical predator. The house and the trust, the security measures at the house were completed. The new windows, the fortified locks, the alarm system, the house was now a fortress. But it was also a place of vibrant, positive activity. Imogen and I began the work of designing the Thomas Vance Legacy House, the shelter that would eventually occupy my home. We decided it would be a specialized facility focusing on older women who were financially dependent on their abusers, the very trap I had been in. We spent hours in the library, drawing up floor plans and discussing programs. I felt Thomas's presence in the planning, a sense of purpose that had been missing since his death. I was transforming the house from a tomb of fear into a beacon of empowerment, a fitting tribute to the honorable man who had built our life. The last thing I did that evening was place a small, handwritten note inside the copy of the finalized trust documents. It was a note addressed to Wesley, to be delivered to him only after my death, explaining my decision to leave him nothing but the memory of his father's pride. "I will not live in fear anymore, Thomas," I whispered to the empty room. "Our foundation is strong again." The courtroom victory, while legally definitive, didn't erase the lingering trauma. I was safe, secured by law and steel, but the invisible scars were the most persistent. I began a regular schedule of counseling, recognizing that years of suppressed fear needed to be systematically addressed. It was in these quiet, structured sessions that I truly began to unpack the psychological damage Wesley had inflicted. My therapist, Dr. Lennox, helped me articulate the insidious nature of the abuse. It wasn't just the final slap. It was the slow death by 1,000 cuts, the constant gaslighting, the emotional manipulation, and the calculated use of my late husband's memory against me. "He used Thomas's death as a weapon, Eleanor," Dr. Lennox explained one afternoon. "He created a narrative where you were the cold one, the rigid one, the one who loved the house more than the son. This justified his own failures and his right to punish you. When he struck you, he was striking the authority he felt suffocated by." This realization was painful but liberating. I finally accepted that I was not a failed mother. I was a long-suffering victim who had confused enabling with unconditional love. My silence hadn't been respect. It had been compliance born of fear and shame. The physical recovery was slow. The headaches persisted, a dull, thrumming reminder of the impact against the hutch. My orthopedic specialist diagnosed a lower lumbar strain from the force of the throw, requiring weekly physical therapy sessions. It was during one of these therapy sessions that I ran into an old friend, Mrs. Adeline Brooks from the garden club. She was there nursing a knee injury. "Eleanor, I hadn't heard you were having trouble with your back," she exclaimed, genuinely concerned. I decided then and there I would no longer lie. I could not be a credible advocate for the Thomas Vance Legacy Fund if I continued to hide my own truth. "It's not age, Adeline," I told her, my voice quiet but firm. "My son Wesley threw me against my china cabinet a few weeks ago. The injury is a result of that assault." Adeline's face crumpled with shock, quickly replaced by sorrow. She didn't offer a clumsy justification for Wesley or tell me to forgive him. Instead, she reached out and gently squeezed my arm. "Oh, Eleanor, I am so terribly sorry. You are a woman of immense dignity. If you need anything, anything at all, you just call." Telling the truth, simply and factually, was another form of liberation. Every time I admitted the truth, I stripped Wesley's abuse of its power. The shame dissolved, belonging entirely to him. Wesley's desperate plea, the next major event, was the arraignment for the criminal battery charge. Because of the permanent restraining order, Wesley and I were forbidden to be in the same space without court supervision. I was scheduled to be present, but I didn't have to testify. The evidence was already overwhelming. Wesley, having exhausted his savings on the initial bond and the public defender's meager resources, was now floundering. He was facing a potential criminal record and a significant fine, not to mention the social and professional stigma that would follow him. The arraignment was postponed twice. Then, 2 days before the new date, I received a package. It arrived by courier, bypassing the security systems, addressed to me personally. It was a handwritten letter from Wesley. He had violated the spirit, if not the precise letter, of the restraining order by sending it. I immediately called Mr. Harlan, who advised me to photograph the envelope and the contents, and then to let him retrieve the physical letter as evidence of the ongoing harassment. Before Mr. Harlan arrived, I couldn't resist. I had to know what was inside. I needed to see if the past few weeks of harsh reality had awakened the boy I loved or solidified the monster I feared. I opened it. The handwriting was shaky, erratic, stained with what looked suspiciously like dried coffee or liquor. "Mom, I am writing this from the motel. It's a dump. I can't sleep. I can't eat your food. I keep thinking about what you've done to me. You have ruined my life, Mom. Ruined it. I know I was wrong. I know I was stressed. I said terrible things and I shouldn't have touched you. But families fight. Dad and you fought sometimes. You never called the police on him. This is an overreaction. This is cruel. I need you to tell the judge you've forgiven me. You are my mother. Mothers forgive. If you don't drop the charges, I will have a criminal record. I'll never get a job again. You're condemning me to the street. I am your son, Eleanor, your only son. Don't let your stubborn pride destroy the Vance name. Please, I am begging you. Drop the charges, lift the order, and let me come home. We can work this out." I promise I will get help. I miss the house. I miss your cooking. I miss being safe. Your son, Wesley." I read the letter twice. The first time, my heart ached with a familiar motherly pain, hearing the voice of the frightened child. The second time, the pain was replaced by cold fury. There was zero remorse. There was no apology for my pain, only a lament for his discomfort. He didn't miss me. He missed the security and the services I provided. He missed the safety of the house. He was not begging for forgiveness. He was demanding the restoration of his privilege. The promise to get help was conditional, a transactional clause dependent on me dropping the charges. This letter was definitive proof that my decision had been correct. He still saw me as an obstacle, a service provider, and an enabler, not a human being he had violently assaulted. I called Mr. Harlan back. "Mr. Harlan, please collect the letter and tell the prosecutor to proceed with the maximum recommended penalty." This letter is not an apology. It is a confession of his entitlement. The legacy takes shape the day after the letter arrived. I met with Imogen and the architect we had hired to begin conceptualizing the renovations for the Thomas Vance legacy house. It was a tangible step forward, a direct antithesis to Wesley's despair. The architect, a thoughtful young woman named Sarah, presented us with the plans. We would be modifying the back wing of the house, where Wesley's suite of rooms was located, to create 3 separate, self-contained apartments for the residents. My own suite would remain untouched for now. The core of the house, the parlor, the library, the dining room, will remain communal space, I explained to Sarah. I want it to feel like a home, not an institution. A place of dignity and safety, where these women can heal without the pressure of having to immediately find work or housing. We discussed the Thomas Vance Library, a sunny room on the 2nd floor that would house resources for financial literacy and job training. We planned a professional kitchen where residents could host cooking classes, rebuilding skills and community. As we stood in the dining room discussing the possibility of turning the attached sunroom into a private counseling space, I looked at the table where Wesley had faced his verdict. It felt cleaner, lighter. The heavy history of fear was being meticulously scrubbed away by the purpose of hope. Imogen watched me carefully, then smiled. "Eleanor, you are pouring your love back into this house, turning it into the monument of Thomas's true values, hard work, community, and protection, not the spoiled entitlement Wesley always represented." That night, alone in my safe, secured bedroom, I felt a familiar loneliness, but it was a quiet, manageable ache, not the paralyzing terror of before. I read Wesley's letter one last time. I didn't feel rage or sadness. I felt a profound sense of closure. I folded the letter neatly and placed it in a box in my closet, labeling the box, "Wesley, the final chapter." I would not forget him. I would not forget the boy he was or the pain the man inflicted. But I was finally, truly, moving on, building a future not despite him, but because of the absolute necessity of separating myself from his destructive shadow. My future was now tied to the women I would help, women who deserved the same safety and dignity I had fought so hard to reclaim. The Thomas Vance legacy house was becoming my new purpose, my final, truest love story. The arraignment finally proceeded a week later. I attended, accompanied by Imogen, who served as my quiet shield. Wesley, his spirits visibly broken and his appearance more haggard, pleaded not guilty, a move Mr. Harlan assured me was purely procedural, buying the defense time. The criminal justice machine, cold and indifferent to family ties, was now fully engaged. The days that followed were consumed by the meticulous work of the Thomas Vance Legacy Fund. We established the initial board of directors, recruiting influential women from Charleston who were passionate about women's advocacy. We began the arduous process of filing for nonprofit status. This constructive action was the antithesis of the fear and stagnation that had defined the last few years. Every meeting, every piece of paperwork, was a nail in the coffin of Wesley's influence over my life. One rainy afternoon, as Imogen and I reviewed the detailed financial forensics report compiled by her team, we made a discovery that was even more shocking than the $120,000 in exploitation. The report meticulously tracked every large withdrawal Wesley had made from my private accounts. Most of it was confirmed liquor, gambling, and poor investments, but there was one anomaly: a series of 6 significant irregular payments totaling over $35,000 made to a law firm in Atlanta over the past 2 years. Imogen, her face stern, recognized the firm immediately. "That is the firm of Davies and Hawthorne. They specialize in complex estate law, specifically challenging established trusts and wills." My blood ran cold. "What does that mean, Imogen?" "It means, Eleanor," she said, her voice dropping, "that Wesley wasn't just squandering money out of self-pity. He was actively planning to take full control. He wasn't relying on you to die and inherit. He was preparing to challenge your current will and quite possibly Thomas's original trust, trying to ensure he was the sole legal heir, likely claiming you were mentally unfit or unduly influenced." He was setting up a preemptive legal attack. The revelation was a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a spoiled, angry son, this was calculated, prolonged treachery. He hadn't just used me, he had planned my legal annihilation. The money he spent on these lawyers was money he expected to leverage to take everything, the house, the savings, Thomas's pension, while I was still alive. I felt a dizzying wave of nausea. He was preparing to declare me incompetent, I whispered, realizing the depth of his malice. Precisely, Imogen confirmed, gathering the papers. He was creating a paper trail to show his alleged concern over your spending and hoarding the very things he yelled about. This confirms, Eleanor, that the decision to disinherit him entirely and establish the legacy fund was not just justified. It was an act of pure self-defense. The shock of this discovery hardened the last, small corner of my motherly heart that still harbored guilt. The man who sat in the courtroom was not a victim of circumstance, but a meticulously calculating predator who saw his mother only as an obstacle and a resource to be legally dismantled. The unexpected meeting a few days later, I was attending physical therapy for my back. I was finishing my session, walking stiffly on the treadmill when I saw him, Wesley. He was waiting outside the therapy room, leaning against the sterile white wall. The restraining order explicitly stated he could not come within 500 feet of me. I froze, my heart pounding a panicked rhythm in my chest. I immediately reached for the personal security pendant I now wore constantly. He was thinner than he looked in court, dressed in clothes that were clean but clearly rumpled and too large. He looked nervous, frightened, and deeply unhealthy. "Mom, wait," he called out, taking a tentative step toward me, violating the order with every movement. Before I could activate the pendant, one of the clinic staff, alerted by his desperate tone and my sudden rigidity, stepped between us. "Sir, you need to leave the premises immediately. You are disturbing a patient." Wesley ignored her, his eyes locked on mine. He looked pathetic, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the ghost of the little boy who had cried on my shoulder after his father's funeral. "I know what you're doing, Mom," he cried out, his voice hoarse. "The lawyer told me you're setting up a fund, you're going to give the house away to strangers, it's Dad's house. You can't, I need that inheritance, Mom, I'm in trouble, I'm going to lose everything." He was begging now not for reconciliation, but for the restoration of his expected fortune. The entitlement was so absolute it was breathtaking. I spoke, my voice thin but clear, cutting through the silence of the waiting area. "You are violating the restraining order, Wesley. Every word you speak is compounding your legal trouble." His face contorted into a mask of pure desperation and rage. "It's your fault, you think you're better than me. You're just a bitter old woman who loves her china more than her own blood." The assistant therapist, realizing the seriousness of the situation, swiftly activated the clinic's panic alarm. Wesley saw the alarm light flash. His desperate courage evaporated instantly. He knew the police would arrive in minutes. He turned and fled, bursting out the emergency exit door, running down the street. I leaned against the wall, trembling, the panic subsiding. The clinic staff apologized profusely. I nodded, thanking them for their quick action. As the police arrived to take my report, I realized something vital. Wesley's emotional volatility, his inability to control his impulses, and his all-consuming sense of entitlement had not changed one bit. His desperation over the loss of his inheritance was his primary driving force, overriding his fear of arrest. The Thomas Vance Legacy Fund was hitting him exactly where it hurt, his absolute expectation of unearned wealth, the final conversation with the past. Later that evening, back in my secure, quiet home, I sat in the parlor, the room where I had last faced his verbal assault over the rattling window latch. I felt an overwhelming need to sever the psychological tether for good. I took the box labeled Wesley, the final chapter, from my closet. Inside were his letter, a few old-school drawings, and a small, worn baseball glove, a relic from the boy Thomas adored. I kept the letter and the glove. The drawings, the awards, the pictures of the innocent boy. I pulled out the old cigar box where Thomas used to keep his important papers and placed the innocent memories inside. Then I focused on the letter. I read his final, desperate words again. "You think you're better than me. You're just a bitter old woman who loves her china more than her own blood." I picked up the baseball glove, smelling the faded leather and dust. I closed my eyes and imagined Thomas sitting across from me, his presence solid and comforting. "He says I love things more than him, Thomas," I whispered to the empty room. "He says I am bitter, he says I am destroying him." I opened my eyes, looking at the sturdy walls, the solid foundation of our home. "I don't love the china, Wesley. I love the order it represents. I love the sanctuary that Thomas built with his own two hands. I am protecting the value of responsibility that you threw away for a bottle." I took a pen and on the back of Wesley's pathetic letter I wrote my own final internal reply. Not a letter to be sent, but a truth to be accepted. "My dearest Wesley, you asked me why. You asked me to save you, I cannot. You were born into the legacy of a great and honorable man. He worked, he respected, he protected. Your inheritance was never the house or the money. Your inheritance was the example he set. You rejected the example and instead demanded the reward. You confused privilege with purpose. You traded your father's honor for resentment. The house you demanded will now shelter women who know the true cost of violence. Its purpose is no longer to enable your downfall, but to facilitate their rise. I am not bitter, I am liberated. I am not destroying you, I am finally refusing to subsidize your destruction. Go now, Wesley, find your own foundation. I will not be waiting. I signed it simply, Eleanor. I sealed the letter back into the envelope and placed it firmly back into the box. This was the final, total psychological break. I had fully processed the betrayal, understood the calculated malice, and affirmed my own decision. I was ready for the next phase of the fight. I was ready to live. The criminal trial for battery was scheduled for 3 months after the physical therapy encounter, giving Wesley just enough time to exhaust his few remaining contacts and funds. He hired a cheaper, more aggressive defense attorney who based the entire strategy on attacking my credibility, claiming I was a grieving, wealthy widow suffering from increasing cognitive decline who had exaggerated a minor family disagreement to control her son's financial future. This was exactly why Imogen and Mr. Harlan had ensured every detail was documented. We were prepared. The trial was a grueling performance. Being cross-examined by Wesley's attorney, a man whose sole purpose was to twist my pain into a conspiracy theory, was one of the hardest things I had ever done. He painted me as an emotionally volatile woman obsessed with material possessions and the memory of her dead husband. Mrs. Vance, the defense attorney, Mr. Keller, sneered, leaning over the podium. Isn't it true that you placed an almost obsessive value on items like your grandmother's vase and your husband's portrait, elevating them above the feelings of your own son? I cherished memories and history, Mr. Keller, I responded calmly, meeting his gaze. My son destroyed those items in a rage, demonstrating his complete lack of respect for my feelings and my past. And isn't it true that Mr. Vance merely pushed you away in self-defense, perhaps after you in your agitated state attempted to strike him first? No, sir, Mr. Vance grabbed me, shook me violently, and then threw me across the kitchen into a hutch. He then slapped me while I was on the floor. I did not raise a hand to him. You are a woman of advanced age, Mrs. Vance, and you were exhausted. Isn't it possible that you misremembered the sequence of events? I misremember nothing, Mr. Keller. The pain, the taste of my own blood, those details are indelible. I am 65 years old, but my mind is perfectly sound. And I remember the look in my son's eyes when he realized he had finally broken the last barrier of respect. It was a look of satisfaction. The turning point came with the introduction of the objective evidence. Detective Thorne presented the crime scene photos, the shattered glass, the faint blood spatter on the tile, and the forensic photographs of the damage to the china hutch, consistent with a powerful impact. Then the court-appointed physician testified, confirming the severity of my injuries, the mild concussion, and the lumbar strain. Finally, Imogen, acting as an expert witness on financial abuse, took the stand. She presented the documents detailing Wesley's attempted fraud on Thomas's life insurance and the large payments made to the estate law firm that specialized in challenging competency. Your Honor, members of the jury, Imogen stated clearly, this was not a one-time argument. This was a pattern of calculated abuse. Mr. Vance's physical violence was simply the culmination of a long-term strategy to financially and psychologically paralyze his mother so he could illegally gain control of her entire estate. He did not ask for money, he demanded it. He did not ask for help, he prepared for legal battle against her competency. This was a sustained assault on Mrs. Vance's life, dignity, and autonomy. The jury, composed of working people, both men and women, seemed visibly moved. They were not interested in the defense's narrative of the spoiled rich widow. They saw the facts, a man exploiting and injuring his aging parent. Wesley testified, attempting to maintain a persona of contrite sadness, but under cross-examination by the prosecutor, his innate entitlement shone through. Mr. Vance, why did you feel entitled to take money from your mother's retirement accounts without her knowledge? The prosecutor asked. It was family money, Wesley stammered. It was money my father intended for my security. I was just taking what was mine. Did you feel it was also yours to violently shake and strike your mother when she questioned your actions? No, sir, that was a mistake. I regret that. You regret the mistake, Mr. Vance, or the injury you inflicted? Wesley paused, his eyes darting to me, searching for pity one last time. I regret the misunderstanding. His failure to acknowledge the true injury, the betrayal, and the physical pain was his final undoing. The jury returned a verdict swiftly, guilty on the charge of third-degree battery. Wesley was sentenced to 90 days in the county correctional facility, followed by 2 years of supervised probation, mandatory alcohol abuse counseling, and court-ordered victim restitution for my medical bills. The penalty was not severe in legal terms, but for Wesley, the humiliation and the criminal record were life-altering. The system had finally held him accountable. The empty room and the new purpose the day after the sentencing, the silence in my house felt different. It was the silence of finality. Imogen and Mr. Harlan took me out for a quiet lunch, a small acknowledgement of the ordeal we had successfully navigated. "It's over, Eleanor," Mr. Harlan said, raising his glass of iced tea. "You are safe, the trust is impenetrable, the house is secure. The criminal justice system has closed the door on him, and the legacy is secured," Imogen added. "We filed the nonprofit paperwork this morning. The Thomas Vance Legacy Fund is now official." As soon as I returned home, I walked straight to Wesley's former suite of rooms, the rooms that would soon be renovated into the self-contained apartments for the shelter residents. It was the first time I had been inside since his hurried departure. The room was dusty and lifeless, smelling faintly of stale air and something indefinably bitter. It was an empty space waiting to be filled. As I stood there, I felt a deep, profound wave of sorrow, not for the man who was now facing jail time, but for the boy, the potential that had been lost. I saw the stain on the carpet where he had spilled a drink during one of his rages. I saw the faint scratch on the wooden floor where he had dragged a suitcase in a huff. These were not memories of love, they were monuments to his dissipation. I took a final, deep breath, accepting the grief for the son who might have been. Then I pulled out my phone and called Sarah, the architect. "Sarah, it's Eleanor. We can start the demolition next week. I want the back wing completely gutted. I want no trace of the past resident left. I want to build a space of absolute hope." The renovations began immediately. The house was soon filled with the sounds of hammers, saws, and construction workers, a noise that was loud and messy but fundamentally constructive. The sounds of building of creation were 1,000 times more welcome than the terrifying silence that used to precede Wesley's rages. I watched as the walls that had held his bitterness were torn down, creating open, sunny spaces. The rooms that had been monuments to his entitlement were being transformed into spaces for recovery and independence for women who truly needed them. I spent my afternoons in the parlor overseeing the work, sometimes just watching the dust motes dance in the light. The house was actively healing, transforming its identity from the site of a tragic domestic failure into the site of a triumphant communal purpose. The legacy blooms. 6 months after the assault, Wesley was released from the county facility. He served his time quietly, avoiding media attention. I received one final piece of information from Mr. Harlan. Wesley had left Charleston immediately after his release, having been unable to secure employment or stable housing due to his criminal record and restraining order. He was reportedly heading west, aiming for a fresh start with minimal funds. I felt a pang but no regret. His fate was now entirely in his own hands. My duty was done. At the same time, the renovations were completed. The Thomas Vance Legacy house was stunning. It was warm, secure, and beautiful. The 3 apartments were fully furnished, each with its own kitchenette and private bath. The communal spaces, the sunroom counseling area, the new professional kitchen, and the library were serene and inviting. We hosted a small dedication ceremony. Imogen, Charlotte, Mr. Harlan, Detective Thorne, now retired, and a few key church and community leaders attended. I stood at the podium in the newly christened Thomas Vance Community Room, looking out at the faces of the people who had stood by me. "This house," I began, my voice clear and strong, "was once a place of deep love and then, for a time, a place of silent fear. But my late husband, Thomas Vance, taught me that when a structure is weak, you reinforce the foundation. This house now stands on a new, unbreakable foundation: accountability, dignity, and independence. I shared the true purpose of the fund: to help older women escape financial and emotional abuse. I didn't mention Wesley by name, but everyone understood the subtext. The greatest inheritance Thomas left us was not money," I concluded, my eyes welling up with tears not of sorrow but of fierce pride. "It was the example of a life lived with honor. This house now honors that example. It is a monument to hope, dedicated to all the women who are strong enough to finally choose safety." The first 3 residents moved in the following week. They were 3 older women, all professional, all survivors of long-term emotional and financial abuse by family members. Watching them walk into the beautiful, safe space, their eyes wide with relief and gratitude, was the greatest payment I could ever receive. As I walked out of the house that evening, handing the keys to the new house manager, I looked back at the facade. It no longer looked like the house where I had suffered. It looked like a lighthouse. The year following the sentencing and the opening of the Thomas Vance Legacy House was the most peaceful and purposeful period of my adult life. I officially moved into a smaller, charming carriage house apartment behind the main residence, allowing me to maintain proximity to the fund without interfering with the residents' privacy. I remained intimately involved, serving as the fund's chairman of the board and volunteering as a mentor. I watched with a quiet joy as the first 3 residents, Martha, Evelyn, and Rose began to heal. Martha, who had been a gifted but stifled artist, found solace in the sunny communal studio space. Evelyn, who had been an accountant before her husband seized all their assets, began volunteering to teach financial literacy workshops to local women. And Rose, the most outwardly fragile, found her voice in group counseling, slowly shedding the decade of fear her son had imposed upon her. My pain, my shame, and my fight had been transformed into their opportunity. Every evening when I saw the light spilling from the windows of the legacy house, casting a warm glow on the Spanish moss and the oak trees, I felt a deep, profound connection to Thomas. This was the true legacy, a structure built on honor, dedicated to protection. The community's perception of me shifted entirely. I was no longer the reclusive widow. I was Eleanor Vance, the visionary who had turned her personal tragedy into a resource for others. The whispers of judgment disappeared, replaced by genuine admiration for my courage and philanthropy. My relationship with Charlotte deepened. She remained my steadfast friend, celebrating my resilience and assisting with the fund's early outreach programs. Imogen, having ensured the legal framework was ironclad, returned to Atlanta but remained a committed member of the board, flying in monthly for meetings. I learned to live without the fear of the doorbell ringing, without the anxiety of heavy footsteps on the stairs. My sleep was deep and undisturbed. The physical pain from the assault slowly subsided, becoming a faint, dull ache, a manageable memory, not a constant crisis. The final contact one cold, gray morning, nearly 18 months after the trial, I received an official-looking letter from an obscure legal aid office in a remote western state. I recognized the return address as the general vicinity where Mr. Harlan had last tracked Wesley. I opened it with steady hands. My heart was calm, there was no fear, only detached curiosity. The letter was brief and impersonal. It stated that Mr. Wesley Vance, facing multiple setbacks and profound legal and financial difficulty, was petitioning the court for a formal legal dissolution of the parent-child relationship, citing irreconcilable and irreparable differences. It was a formal request to be disowned, to sever the legal and financial tie completely. He wasn't fighting for reconciliation or forgiveness. He was seeking the final bureaucratic confirmation that he was truly, irrevocably, alone. He had finally accepted that his mother would never again be his source of comfort or cash. He was taking the last, desperate step to remove the potential of the relationship, because the reality of the relationship had only brought him consequence. I called Mr. Harlan, who confirmed the legality of the petition. He is essentially requesting to be disowned by the court, Eleanor. He is stating that no parental obligation exists, nor should any claim to inheritance be possible. He has already been disinherited, and I have no obligation to him, I stated calmly. What is the legal implication? If you agree, the court will formally sever the legal ties. It will be the final, absolute closure. He will have no legal standing to ever contact you or challenge the Thomas Vance Legacy Fund on the basis of being your son. It is, ironically, the ultimate protection. I thought about it for only a moment. It was a cold, formal finality, but it was the end he demanded. It was the absolute freedom I had earned. Tell the court I agree, Mr. Harlan. Tell them I wish him peace and self-sufficiency and that the petition is granted without contest. The legal bond should be dissolved. It was done. The final legal thread that connected me to the man who had tried to destroy me was cut, not by my hand this time, but by his own defeated choice. The fullness of life, I returned to my life unburdened. I started a new chapter of my bookkeeping business, specializing in helping other local nonprofits manage their finances. I was learning to paint watercolors in the studio alongside Martha. I hosted Sunday dinners, filling my carriage house with the sounds of laughter and good company, my chosen family of survivors and supporters. One afternoon, I walked through the main house, checking in on the residents. I found Evelyn in the Thomas Vance library, sitting by the window, reviewing a job application. She looked up, her face peaceful and confident. "Eleanor," she smiled, "I got the job. I start next week. I'm renting a small cottage near the water. I'm moving out." I felt a surge of pure joy, unmixed with any motherly anxiety. "Evelyn, that is wonderful. We are so proud of you. I owe it all to this place," she said, looking around the library. "And to you, you taught me that my life wasn't over. That I was allowed to be safe and independent. You taught me how to fight back, Eleanor." As I hugged her goodbye, I realized that every time a woman left the Thomas Vance Legacy House restored, independent, and hopeful, Thomas's true legacy was being fulfilled. My pain was not wasted. It was harvested, turning sorrow into strength, one life at a time. I had come full circle. I was safe, productive, and surrounded by a community of brave, determined women. Final thought for the audience. And that, dear viewers, is where Eleanor Vance's story ends, not with a tragic collapse but with a hard-won triumph. She didn't find her courage in a moment of violence. She found it in the painstaking, deliberate choice to prioritize her own safety and dignity over the paralyzing comfort of an unhealthy bond. If you have listened to this story and recognized the quiet fear, the enabling silence, or the crushing weight of shame, remember this: your dignity is non-negotiable. You are not a service to be exploited or a wall to be struck. Eleanor Vance built a sanctuary out of her own wreckage. She proved that the hardest acts of love are often those that enforce boundaries, and that sometimes the only way to save the soul of the one you loved is to firmly, definitively let them go. If you were moved by Eleanor's quiet strength, if you found a piece of your own resolve in her story, please honor her fight. Hit the like button now. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they are not alone. And subscribe to our channel for more tales of courage and consequence. Thank you for listening. May you always choose your peace.